Evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Howard Rowan, Glencoe's village president, and we're here tonight because the village is considering becoming a home rule community. This would require first a vote by the village board, which is planned for the August 15th village board meeting, and then it requires a referendum vote by Glencoe's residents. If the village board decides to proceed, the referendum would be at our November elections this year. Before we vote, we're entitled to information about home rule so we can make an intelligent decision. So let me start with some basic information. Illinois municipalities are either home rule or non-home rule. If a village or a city or a municipality has over 25,000 people, it's automatically home rule. If it has less than that, it's non-home rule. Smaller communities are non-home rule unless they vote in a referendum to become home rule, and that's what we're considering. So what's the difference between home rule and non-home rule? Basically, under the Illinois Constitution, non-home rule governments have very limited powers. They can only do what the state legislature expressly allows them to do. In addition, there are some specific limitations on non-home rule communities. Home rule communities, on the other hand, have more flexibility to handle local issues on their own. Glencoe considered home rule more than 35 years ago, but voted it down. Back then, converting to home rule was way ahead of the curve, except for the cities and villages that are larger than 25,000, none of our neighbors were home rule at that time. Since then, whether they're politically red or blue or purple, virtually all of our previously non-home rule neighbors, Winnetka, Northfield, Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, Highwood, Bannockburn, and Barrington, all of them voted in referenda to become home rule, leaving only Glencoe and Kenilworth as the outliers. Now, we're the ones who are behind the curve. Glencoe staff studied home rule and looked into what made virtually all of our neighbors choose it. They found that not being home rule limits our revenue options, raises our costs, makes it harder to address local issues, and leaves us more reliant on property taxes. This makes it difficult for us to fund local improvements for our infrastructure, like streets, sewers, water pipes, and of course our almost 100-year-old water plant. I'm for home rule, and that's one of the reasons we're considering it now. But in the few remaining minutes of my talk before the village staff explains more about home rule to everyone, I'm going to do something a little unconventional. I'm going to talk about the arguments against home rule, and I think you'll find they actually point the other way. First, non-home rule governments are subject to a property tax cap. Home rule governments are not. Those opposed to home rule say that if the village votes for home rule, then our property taxes will go up. Is that true? The answer is no. In the first place, in the real world, non-home rule tax caps have not made Glencoe's taxes any lower than those of our home rule neighbors. It just hasn't happened. Moreover, like some of our neighbors, including Winnetka, Northfield, Lake Bluff, and Lake Forest, our village board has pledged to keep the property tax cap in place and to pass an ordinance that does that. So if home rule is approved in November, the village will continue to abide by the same property tax cap. And for reasons I'll get to in a moment, home rule should enable the village to operate more efficiently and to charge our residents less. I said less than for our infrastructure improvements. The second main argument you may hear against home rule concerns the bonds that we use to pay for our infrastructure. A non-home rule unit like Glencoe is required to hold a referendum every time we issue bonds. In addition, if we issue bonds, they can't be for longer than 20 years. Opponents of home rule will tell you that without those limitations, the village board will go crazy and will mire us in mountains of pointless debt. And that's a theory, I guess. But in the real world, this didn't happen in any of our neighbors that adopted home rule, and there's no reason to think it'll happen here. Freeing ourselves of the referendum requirement and the 20-year limitation are not bad ideas for Glencoe. They're good ideas. In the first place, there's no danger in Glencoe that we're gonna assume pointless debt. Including our almost century-old water plant, the village is looking at doing more than $100 million of infrastructure work that must be done. You wouldn't want to live here if we didn't do it. Investing in our infrastructure is not pointless. It's not a choice. It's mandatory. We have to do it. The village is looking at home rule precisely because it will enable the village to more efficiently make the investments that we have to make and to give decision-making powers to the people who know Glencoe best, you and your elected representatives. The referendum requirement for bonds also costs you money. Experts aren't always right, but experts advise on when it's the best time to go into the bond market and issue bonds. Companies can take advantage of those experts. Home rule communities can take advantages of those experts. But we're not home rule, so we can't. So when we issue bonds, it's likely that municipal bonds will cost us more. The 20-year limitation on bonds also costs us more. A 20-year bond makes sense for a 20-year asset. But many of our infrastructure assets, particularly the water assets, last far longer than 20 years. Our water plant has lasted almost 100 years so far. If we have to pay for an asset like our water plant or our water infrastructure in 20 years, if we manage to pay for it at all, we're going to have to pay more. The residents now will have to pay more because they're going to have to pay for a 50-year asset in 20 years. And that means your taxes are going to be higher. There's a lot more to say about home rule, and you'll hear some of it this evening. But even if you focus, as I have tonight, on the arguments against home rule, I think what you'll find is that on the one hand, there's a theory, a speculation that if the village has home rule, it will go crazy and mortgage our future. That's a theory. Hadn't happened to any of our neighbors, but it's a theory. On the other hand, if we don't adopt home rule, it is a certainty that we're going to be spending $100 million on infrastructure, and we're all going to be paying more for it because we're not home rule. Opponents of home rule sometimes say that Glencoe is a wonderful place, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They're half right. Glencoe is a wonderful place. But unless we're home rule, our ability to maintain our infrastructure will be in jeopardy, and best case, we'll have to pay more for that infrastructure. So I say, let's make Glencoe better by adopting home rule. What I'd like to do now is introduce our village manager and then our deputy village manager, and they'll tell you more about the specifics of home rule, and then we'll answer your questions. Thanks very much for coming.
Well, good evening, everyone. First of all, can everyone hear us okay as we're speaking? Okay. It's nice to see a crowd to listen tonight, and we're looking forward to engaging with you and answering your questions that you may have. President Rowan introduced me, but my name's Phil Corrali. I'm the village manager. I've been in that role now almost 11 years, and happy this evening to be able to share some information with you. I hope that some of you may have taken the opportunity to look at some of this information that we already have on the village's website. But if not, the information is available. We're not really saying anything that we haven't already posted, but hopefully it's an opportunity to get a little bit more familiar with the subject. And Ben is going to advance our slides for us. President Rowan really did a nice job of outlining, what is home rule. And I think most simply, it is a creation of the state constitution in 1970 that breaks apart local governments into two categories: those that are or are not home rule units of government, non-home rule units, because they are creatures of the state, derive all of their authority generally from state statute. So unless there is legislative authority that's been granted, non-home rule communities don't have the ability to enact certain ordinances or take certain actions that may be in the best interest of that local government, based on a series of factors that their elected officials determine. And it has kind of structural limitations built in. There is also a burden of funded and unfunded mandates. And when I mentioned before kind of these two categories of municipalities, there have been circumstances in the past where certain mandates are passed on to non-home rule communities, but are not passed on to home rule communities by state statute and state legislation. So when you think about that in the context of Glencoe, why isn't Glencoe home rule? President Rowan mentioned this already. You have to be either 25,000 in population, at which point you automatically become home rule, or seek out a referendum. In 1988, I won't repeat again what the village president mentioned. This was a question that was posed to voters here in our community. And I will say that it has been reviewed and discussed many times since 1988. And back in 2005, and again in 2012, and again in 2019, the subject was brought up, committees were convened, and ultimately the village board elected not at that time to move forward. Most recently, back in 2019, as part of the village's strategic plan, there was a review of form of government. And a meeting was held in early 2020 where the village board, after about a year and a half of study, made the determination that it made sense that perhaps a referendum be moved forward with. And about a month later, we shut everything down with the pandemic, and we put that idea on ice. Primarily because of the opportunity to have events and discussions like this. The opportunity, something this important is something you want to be able to dialogue with the community about and talk through. So that study and analysis was brought back in 2023, and that brings us to this point right now. So again, seeking why now? I think these points we'll talk through in some detail throughout the presentation tonight, but really decision-making authority, finding ways to spread out the tax burden and change perhaps the way some of our bonds are issued, diversifying revenues, finding ways to reduce our reliance on property taxes. It is our largest revenue stream that funds our budget. Over 51% of our general fund revenues come from property taxes. Compliance with state and county mandates has continued to be a challenge. Long-term contracts, and we'll talk a bit about what that means in terms of the village's ability to be flexible. So when we think about revenue diversification, as I just mentioned, we are heavily reliant on property taxes. That should come as no surprise to anybody in the room. Glencoe is a bedroom community. We have a limited retail environment. That being said, our retail environment is as strong as it's ever been. We have 3 car dealerships on our west side of the community that have been in place now for about 20 years that are critically important to our overall revenue stream. But finding ways to limit how property taxes impact our community has been a subject that the village board has grappled with for a long time. A simple answer is non-home rule communities have fewer alternatives available to them outside of the very traditional ones that have been established by state statute. President Rowan mentioned this. I think it's worth repeating that the village board has spoken about this and believes that maintaining that tax cap that's in place for non-home rule communities is an important part of what we're doing in having this dialogue. That if a referendum were passed and approved by voters, that ordinance that would, that President Rowan has mentioned, would limit how the village board utilizes the taxing authority that's been granted to it. And this is something that we've seen work very well in other non-home rule communities that have become home rule communities because there have been opportunities to find ways, and we'll talk about that, to limit why property taxes is utilized for certain functions. Our pension liabilities, Nikki's going to talk a little bit about this. I think this is something that you read a lot about. I read an op-ed in Cranes today talking about Chicago's pension liabilities, but it's a function that we are subject to by state statute, and even if we were home rule, we would still be subject to that same requirement by the state. But I think it's helpful if Nikki can give a little bit more context on that.
Sure. Okay. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Nikki Larson. I'm the Deputy Village Manager for the Village of Glencoe and also the CFO. Just to build upon what Phil was Just to build upon what Phil was saying, all of the village's full-time employees are covered by state pensions. Now, when I say state pensions, it's not part of the state pension system that you hear about in the news. It's all funded locally. And we do use independent actuaries to calculate what we need to contribute for our employees. So all of our public safety officers, our public works employees, our administrative staff are all covered by public pension system, and it's all set out by statute. So the village has very little control in terms of what benefits are granted to our employees, but we do get to pay the bill. So our village has worked diligently with some consultants to try and change our pension funding policy to reduce the cost to the residents to the extent that we can. But speaking to revenue diversification, our main funding source for those pensions runs through the property tax bill. Right now, as Phil mentioned, property taxes make up about 51% of our general fund revenue. Out of that, our pension liability, our biggest contribution is to our police pension fund to cover our public safety officers. Those contributions have risen by 52% in the last 6 years. Our ability to manage that is severely constrained by being a non-home rule community. Our current property tax levy, because of the cap, only covers about 50%, 55% of that annual contribution that we have to make. And again, we do contribute in excess of what the state requires us to do to try and pay that down faster, similar to like an extra mortgage payment that you would make. But because of that, we are obviously very interested in the revenue diversification that would be allowable under a home rule status. That would help us minimize our reliance on the tax bill to pay that bill that we have to pay regardless of our governance statute. Okay. So just continuing on this, trying to look into alternative revenue sources. I know Phil mentioned this earlier. Our sales tax revenue has risen to almost 12% of our general fund revenue. That's important to note because of recent changes in law, but that helps us minimize the reliance on the property taxes. Being home rule would allow us to expand that a little bit, and we'll get into that in a moment in terms of economic development and opportunities that we would be able to grow that revenue. But to the extent that we can grow our non-property tax revenues, that reduces the burden on our residential base. And then speaking, I know President Rowan mentioned this earlier, but we have done some extensive research in terms of limiting the property tax rate. And what we have found in our surrounding communities, because almost all of them are home rule, if you compare a comparable property in Glencoe to those of our neighbors, Glencoe's tax rate isn't much lower. In fact, it's in the top 5 of our comparable communities. Because of our surrounding communities' home rule status, they've been able to find revenues other than the property tax bill to help fund their operations. So our research has actually shown that having home rule status will actually reduce property tax bills, or at least reduce the pressure and slow the acceleration of your tax rate.
Just to note a couple of points, as we think about it from an economic development standpoint, something that we have experienced in this community, particularly over the last 6 or 7 years, is just a resurgent downtown business district. Our commercial sector is as successful as it's perhaps ever been, and a lot of people recognize that because they can't find a parking space in our downtown business district. I'd like to say that that's a good problem. That's a problem worth having, because what that says is that we have a place in this community that attracts people, not only who live here, but who are from the North Shore or elsewhere. We have heard from some of our local businesses, one of which is Guildhall, that they served 100,000 meals last year. I will say, when Writers Theater was at full tilt, when the building was brand new in 2016, we were doing some cartwheels because they were attracting 60,000 people a year into that theater space. We know that Glencoe is more of a destination than it has been in the past. That's an opportunity for us as a community to say, you don't live here, but we'd like to find a way to tap into the fact that you want to come here. How can we create revenue streams that rely upon visitors more than rely upon our residents? How could that work? Those are questions that I think deserve some thought and consideration, whether you're talking about a sales tax, whether you're talking about a food and beverage tax, whether you're talking about an entertainment tax. There are ways to seek to find ways to limit what you and I, as residents of the community, are relied upon to do. Obviously, property taxes aren't going to go away, but how can we continue to limit that growth? Where can we find those resources? I do think it's important to make mention of economic development. It's as important as it's ever been. We are seeing neighboring communities that look to Glencoe and say, boy, we wish our downtown was like yours. We wish we had the people, the regular traffic, the fact that we continue to struggle a little bit with how we park all of those people is, again, a sign that good things are happening here. Attracting and maintaining our business community is particularly important in that vein, and that's something that we know home rule communities have some additional tools available to them. Being thoughtful about redevelopment, if those opportunities ever do come up, and seeking ways to make sure that the village board can make decisions with the feedback and input of the community that is most beneficial to our community. Is important, and there are limitations from a non-home rule standpoint, particularly when you think about those redevelopment opportunities, even limits to certain zoning variations and things of that nature. And whether we like it or not, we are competing with neighbors. We are finding ourselves in a situation where I get phone calls from residents saying, hey, how come Winnetka just got Hune Bakery? What do they do? How did they get them and we didn't? Well, to some degree, they've created a program, they've created incentives, they've created outreach programs that attract those types of businesses into their community because they have the resources to do so and because they have the flexibility to do so that we don't have. And so those are important decision-making considerations as we look to the future and as we consider what we hope our community can continue to be and can become. So let's talk a bit about infrastructure. The village president mentioned this. This is something that is constantly on our mind. We have a current and regularly annually updated 10-year community investment program. What is that? It is essentially an aggregation of all of the infrastructure projects that we anticipate needing to complete in the next decade. Glencoe is unique. Most communities do a 5-year program, some do a 3. Ours is 10 years. We tie that to a debt service plan that the CFO creates every year and works through with the finance committee of the village board. And the intention behind that is to make it as affordable as we can, to diversify how those projects are paid for, how those projects are programmed. And what's happened is that infrastructure is a never-ending battle. It is a constant need. It is a constant set of investments. They are important investments, as the village president mentioned. They speak to quality of life. We know that having a reliable, safe water supply is potentially one of the most important things that the village can do from an infrastructure standpoint. So what we've done in the past is we have built out rate analyses that are tied to condition assessments of our water distribution system. We are doing that right now with our stormwater collection systems. Obviously, we've spent some money over the last couple of decades to make sure that our stormwater system performs better than it had, and it does perform a lot better than it had, but that doesn't mean we're done. It means that it's a constant process, and seeking to find ways to spread that over time so that we tie some of those investments to the useful life of that investment is particularly important. We haven't included in that CIP a real next step of investment in our water treatment plant. Right now, the Glencoe water plant was built in 1928. It was significantly expanded and updated in 1954, and it still produces water at the highest quality. We're thrilled about that. But we also know that the investment in that facility is coming. That process got underway earlier this year. The village board met in April, and we, at the staff level, provided a 3-hour overview of that facility and our water utility. And what we know is that when you look at a facility like that, and a community like us, you're talking about an investment of tens of millions of dollars over and above the CIP that we have in place. Now, there are opportunities and options and considerations to be looked at and considered from the standpoint of partnering and talking to regional water providers, but we know that no matter what decision is made, it's an expensive one. And so finding a path where Home Rule can help to spread out or diversify the way that those investments are paid for is particularly important. And we are working really hard to change the way that we build the CIP in the first place. One of the things that right now is taking place is that we are seeking to layer our water, sanitary, and storm sewer systems, including our street condition analysis and our sidewalk condition analysis, to build out projects that are multidisciplinary. The flexibility to be able to do that is enhanced in a home rule environment versus what we deal with right now. We have done in this community a great job of investing in our infrastructure, but it has been to some degree piecemealed out so that we can live within a referendum schedule, that we can afford the perhaps less than ideal bond environment that we're in, and so that we can continue to make progress even if it's not all the way. That's something that we know we can do better with, that we can be more proactive, more effective in the way that we invest those dollars so that we resurface a road, and when we do that, we're also replacing a water main if it needs to be. We're also updating that storm sewer if it needs to be, and we're dealing with whatever other components, and we're doing it once. We impact a neighborhood once, and then we go away for a while. That's a goal that we have. I think importantly, and again, the village president said this, if we're home rule or we're not is somewhat irrelevant from the fact that we have a need. And infrastructure is our need. In Glencoe, it just has, like everywhere, a particularly important prioritization in what we are focused on and what we're working on. Home rule just helps to make that a bit more manageable. I'm going to have Nikki come up again and talk a little bit about debt and give you some examples on that so that you have that information.
Thank you. So both President Rowan and Village Manager Corelli talked about this a little bit, but as a non-home rule unit, we are limited to borrowing at a 20-year term, and it can be no longer. In most cases, that is sufficient, but when you think about long-term assets such as our water plant, our water main infrastructure, stormwater improvements, some of those assets have useful lives of 40 to 50 to even 60 years. Our water plant's going on 75, I think, almost 100. So what we are doing, or what we are forced to do by as a non-home rule unit, is as we are financing these assets, the repayment of that debt is all front-loaded on the residents of today. So if we were to improve our water mains on your street today, you would repay that back in 20 years. And if you sell your house, the residents moving in would still benefit from that water main, but they would not be paying any of that cost. So what that also does is, as we're repaying that debt, it also elevates the property tax levy that we have to levy onto the residents to repay that debt. If we had the ability to spread that out over 30 years, or with some assets even 40 years, what that would do is lower the portion of the property tax levy that is issued to repay that debt, and it would allow us to more evenly spread that tax burden over the residents that are actually benefiting from the asset. So we took just a small example here. Over the last 5 years, the village spent just shy of $6 million on stormwater improvements. And we do have additional stormwater improvements obviously going on right now as we speak, and programmed in the next 10 years. But if this debt could have been refinanced or financed originally over 30 years, it can make a difference as much as 24% in terms of reducing that cost that's passed on to the residents. And that could be as much as $10 per $10,000 in property tax paid, or $312 over the life of that bond issue. And that sounds like a small amount, but when you're talking about a $77 million CIP over the next 10 years, and that doesn't include our water infrastructure, those dollars multiply pretty quickly. If we took that same scenario and we extended it over 40 years, it would rise to a 36% decrease in the cost of that debt service payment by spreading that out over time. And yes, you would pay additional interest. I know most of you have mortgages, you know how that works. You pay more interest over time. But what that does is more evenly match the cost of that debt to the residents that are benefiting from it by spreading it out. If we look at our full 10-year CIP, and we were able to spread out that debt service levy over from 20 to 30 or 40 years, what that could mean per household, just looking at the assets that could be extended. Now, some of them make sense if you have road improvements. Some of those make sense to finance over a shorter period of time because they have shorter lives. But if we just look at the assets that have those long-term lives, to spread that out, if we were to finance debt over 30 years, the savings could be as much as $1,300 or $1,400 per household, and it would raise $2,000 or more if we were to move to a 40-year. That's all in current dollars, so obviously as things get more expensive, the savings would increase as well. But really trying to make sure that our residents would benefit. The residents that are benefiting would be repaying that cost. When we look at water infrastructure, that's typically not passed on through the water bill. That would all be user-based water charges, but if we look at just water mains alone, that's another $100, $200 per household per year that we could be saving village-wide. And that would be separate away from the property tax levy. So it is, you can see that this money will compound, and it does make a difference in each household. When we talk about financing as a whole, the village is lucky. We're fortunate to have a AAA bond rating. We are one of the few in Illinois that S&P has rated as a AAA community. There are even fewer that are non-home rule communities. And the reasoning behind that, and our rating agency has reiterated this on every ratings call that we're on, is that as a home rule community, you are better equipped to respond to financial emergencies. And you have more tools in your toolbox. If one of your revenues goes down, you have another lever to pull. And the rating agencies generally look upon that favorably, that you are better to be able to be responding to a financial emergency. When we look at the village's current debt portfolio for just the debt that we've borrowed so far, this doesn't include anything that we have planned in the next 10 years. If we were to lose the AAA rating, the impact on the current debt portfolio is about a $2 million cost. So that rating is incredibly important for us. It does allow us, similar to a credit score when you go out to get a mortgage, the higher the credit rating, the lower the interest rate that you pay. So that does make a big difference, and it allows the village to borrow at a lower cost, and we're able to complete more infrastructure improvements at a lower cost for you. So that's definitely something that we want to focus on as well.
So we're going to try to wrap up in just a couple minutes because I know we want to leave time for questions. I just want to point to home rule and preservation and sustainability. Both of these are pretty important subjects in our community as we seek to maintain our historic nature and to kind of prepare for what we're already starting to see relative to climate change. There are just opportunities that as the village looks at its checklist of possibilities, we find ourselves coming up short. We've had conversations with the Preservation Commission about ways to limit the loss of some of our architectural heritage, and we are fairly restricted in what we can do to make sure that Glencoe's architectural heritage is maintained. I also want to point to the fact that there are circumstances and situations where there have been suggestions made relative to certain things that the village may not want to have in our community. There was a recommendation made at one point not that long ago about banning coal tar-based asphalt sealants. That's a product that's used for asphalt driveways by a number of providers. We don't have the ability in this community to say, sorry, we don't want that here because the state hasn't granted us the authority to do so. Some of those things don't even come up until you're looking at something and you find that there's no quick, easy, or option at all to find a path toward limiting those types of environmental issues. So those are just a couple of quick examples. I think as we look at, next one, Ben, as we look at just home rule, what's most important? And I think it boils down to local control over local issues. Providing the opportunity to say, if there's a problem in our community, that problem can be dealt with in this room as opposed to Springfield. That problem can be dialogued over, considered, adjusted, thought through differently in this room, very differently than it can in Springfield. And these types of opportunities are somewhat limited for us, and we do find ourselves searching for answers that may or may not exist, and trying to find a best path for this community, even though we may not have that authority. And so it has certainly been a challenge from time to time as we look to find solutions for certain problems. And that is really, it really boils down to local control over local issues. A couple of next steps before we get to questions. Village President mentioned this. The village board is likely to consider a resolution at their next meeting, which is, August 15th. That would place this question on the November 5th ballot. And we are planning additional public forums and information sharing, 2 more of those at least at this point on August 12th and September 30th, both in this room. There's a lot of information, and while we have questions up, I'm going to have Ben leave this next slide up because that's the QR code that brings you to the village's webpage that provides all of the research and information that has been compiled to date. There will be information shared in the coming months in Inside Glencoe, as well as a postcard that the village will mail out, encouraging folks to go to that webpage. We have already started some social media posts. You may have seen the village president's informational video. There'll be more of those to come, and then we'll be utilizing e-news. With that, I'd like to transition it to Q&A, and Ann is going to walk around. If you just raise your hand and introduce yourself. Does that microphone work? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. And we'll do our best to get you an answer.
Jay Schmiel. And my question is very simple, but I need to do a little bit of motivation for asking it. President Rowan stated that the board is prepared to pass an ordinance with a limit on property tax cap. Now, my experience is some ordinances in Glencoe are taken seriously and some are not. Ordinances can be passed one month and rescinded the next, and even though you pledged to keep them this way, a new board can come along 5, 10, or more years from now and rescind your ordinance. So my simple question is, why not include the property tax cap in the referendum? So the referendum would say, should Glencoe be home rule and should the property tax cap, whatever, be maintained?
I think the simple answer to that question is I don't think we can. That's something I can circle back with our team and find a better answer for you. But I think you can't create limitations through the referendum process. It has to be handled. It has to be handled at the legislative process. But I'll confirm that, Jay. I'm not sure. I don't want to speak out of turn.
We also believe from our initial research that the question that's put out to voters via referendum is prescribed by state legislation. So it's a very specific question that you can't modify. Like when we go out to issue bonds through referendum and we ask the community, we have a little bit of leeway of how we can modify that text. Our understanding from our legal counsel, and we will research this just to verify, is that a home rule referendum is spelled out in statute, the exact wording that you have to use.
Okay, but if that's the case, then you could put a separate referendum on at the same time, if you're allowed to do it, for the property tax cap.
Correct. We'll circle back.
Okay.
We'll circle back. That's a good question.
I'm Mark Rice. I was going to ask that question too. I mean, it's sort of a little bit of a joke over the years. I've been here for about 30 years. You know, to think that you guys aren't going to be here 2 years or 5 years from now. And even if you are, you might change your mind. So, you know, I'm sitting here listening to this. I feel like we're getting, obviously, you've admitted at least you're biased, you guys, before this. I feel like everybody should also have the opportunity to understand some of the negatives, and they were sort of touched upon, but by somebody who's for it. So I'm gonna just, from what you said, like the idea of spreading out, going longer term, like we all know with the credit card, if you pay off the credit card, that's actually better than paying it off over 20 years or 30 years or whatever. Like I'm gonna put out like three things like that I'd like to answer. So please understand that like most people that pay bills know that paying interest for a long time, that's not great. Yeah, in the short run, you might have a lower payment, but in the long run, you're gonna pay hundreds of % more in interest. not a small amount, but, so I'd like to address that. The second thing is, this rating improvement business, or the idea that the rating would be at least maintained. It couldn't get any better, it's as good as it could get, but would be maintained. When you say we have more tools, that's really code for you're able to tax us more. And most people aren't really for that. And you know, I'd appreciate if you delve into like what you mean by that. And then the business of timing, you had mentioned that, you know, we could better time the market, we could time interest rates. Respectfully, you can't time it. If you could do that, you would be the wealthiest person in the world. You wouldn't be a city official. So that sort of falls on deaf ears, that you can better time the interest rate market. So those are the three things I'd love for you to address those things.
Let me take a shot at that. The first one is we're limited to 20 years. We think for really mostly the water resources, which are much longer lived assets, that we should pay for them in a longer time frame. I don't think the credit card analysis is right. You don't pay for your house with a credit card, and the personal comparison really isn't right, even if you talk about your house, because it becomes your house, and when you sell it, you get the benefit. But if you live here, and you live here for 20 years, you get to pay for the entire water improvement, and the people who move in later don't have to pay for any of it. And that means you've paid extra. Now, we get that there's additional interest charges, we get that, but if you time it appropriately, you pay for what you get. If we try to pay for our water infrastructure with 20-year bonds, we might not even be able to do it. One of the things I learned is there are some federal programs that finance water infrastructure. I forget the name of this federal program. It's a borrowing program, and because water infrastructure is so long-lived, the federal program requires that you pay it back over 40 years. But because we're not home rule, we're of course going to try to get federal money if we can, but we probably won't. And so the question is, do you want to pay extra now? And our water plant is getting towards the end of its useful life. We've done studies, and Village Manager Crowley said, tens of millions of dollars. I wish. I mean, the cost of our water improvements, some of the things we've looked at are $100 million just for the water plant. We might not even be able to do it unless we can have a longer lived bond. And if we can't do it, the alternative is to buy water from somebody else, and that might be fine and it might not. So it is absolutely, it's not apples to apples to say you want to pay your credit card right away. Of course we do. We don't want to borrow we don't borrow for our current expenses at all. We borrow only for long-term capital expenses. So that's the first item. Remind me of the second one, and I'll talk about that.
Tools in the toolkit.
Additional taxes. The goal here is not to find ways to tax Glencoe residents more. The goal is to try to find ways to tax other folks to help us. We're limited, and every time I drive along Skokie Boulevard and I look at the corridor that Glencoe bequeathed to Northbrook, I want to hang myself, okay? But, and one of the things I sort of committed as president is to try to avoid the cosmic mistake. But we still have some opportunities to charge folks that aren't you. But if you're non-home rule, you can't do it at all. Also, there are some things that are more appropriately covered by use and a use charge rather than a property tax. We often can't do that either. So the goal is not to try to find extra ways to tax our residents. The goal is to find ways to provide the services you want and particularly when we're talking about home rule, to provide the infrastructure you want and need for your property values. If something happens to our water in Glencoe, your house isn't worth as much as you think it is, and you'll be leaving. And we want to make sure that isn't a problem, and that's really why we think we need home rule. But the goal, I live here. I don't want to pay more. And then I guess the
So you understand my point was, do you wanna give the government, you know, more power to just, if anything happens to us and others as much as they want?
So I understand, you know, now, I'm the government.
Right.
And I get that I'm almost 71, in 20 years, probably won't be around, let alone be in the government. There's an advantage to having more control locally than in Springfield. People can lean on us and get us to do what they want. And if you don't like it, you can throw us out in 2 years. The whole idea here is to have more local control over folks that you have control over. When we talk to our state reps or our county commissioners or our congressmen or our senators, you know, we're one of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, and we don't have a lot of sway. But when somebody calls me or Phil or Nikki, we listen. And we can't always do what everybody wants, and there are differences of opinion, but we really listen. The folks on Hofelder wanted sidewalks, excuse me, stop signs, and you know, they wanted things fixed. They wanted stop signs. They got stop signs. Do you think that would work if you had asked the state legislature? I don't think so. Many of the things people come to ask us, can we do it? Our answer is, sorry, can't. Not specifically authorized. Even when it's authorized, before we do it, we have to consult our lawyer. We can't go 2 feet without consulting our lawyer, and by the way, that's not free. But there is a theory, you know, I totally get the theory that if you empower these mopes, they will go out of control. I get it, but you know, that's us. I didn't get on the Glencoe Village Board. I didn't run for president because I wanted to wreck this place. I grew up here. I love it. I want to make sure the people who are living here have the same experience that I was lucky enough to have. And if you look around at the home rule governments, I mean, when we tried this in 1988, I was on the village board then. I was a young guy, and we tried it, but we were first. And it was voted down, and the theory was, they'll be out of control. That was the theory. I didn't think it was right, but it was an okay theory. But now the theory's been tested. It's been tested in all of our neighbors. I mean, you know, regardless of their political stripe, Winnetka, Northfield, Bannockburn, Lake Forest, Barrington, you know, Highwood, different kinds of places, and no place has mortgaged their future. They just get to pay for their future for less. What was the third question? Timing the market. Well,
It just seems like such a stretch.
well, there are experts that advise companies on when to go into the bond market. They can think about it. You look at what the interest rates are, you think, well, this is a good time to do it, and so we're gonna do these things. And you know, they're not always right, but experts make a fair amount of money, just as they're experts in investments, and they have a chance to do better. We can look at the market and say, good time, and by the time we've done our referendum, it's a bad time. So we have no chance of doing this right, and we would like to do it better. And that's, you know, and again, we don't get famous for doing this. There won't be any statues for us. It's just that we think it's right. It's what I'll actually say, it's the smart move. And the rest of our neighbors have figured that out. And it's time for us to figure that out. Yes, sir.
and then one question. David Leeps.
Welcome.
David Leeps. The comment is, again, going back, and you sort of addressed it about, the more than 20 years. But even in Glencoe, some people buy their houses outright with cash. Most people finance for 20 to 30 years. And that's really important. The idea of having to squeeze all of that into a shorter period might work for some residents, but for the vast majority, it would be an impossibility. I mean, I don't see any other way to look at it.
Well, I consider that a helpful, thoughtful point that supports what we were saying. That's certainly right. We don't have, look, if we could pay for everything out of cash, we wouldn't. Because it's not the right thing for our residents. It still wouldn't be fair unless, look, I've lived here most of my life, and okay, for me, that would work out. But for most residents, you know, they want to stay here for 10 years, 20 years. But even if you stay here for 20 years, you're getting a raw deal if you pay for all of a 40-year asset. So we wouldn't do that.
So my one question was, you had indicated earlier that it gives you more ability to raise funds in different ways. What would be some examples that some of the other towns are doing that we're not able to do right now?
Sure, I'll let,
So
let our CFO,
I can give
answer that.
you some examples, but I will caveat the examples by the fact that any taxes or fees that we would impose would need to be approved by your neighbors that are sitting around you, right? The folks that you elect to the board. But some examples that we've seen in our surrounding communities is expanding the places for eating tax. Right now, the village does have one, but it's very limited in scope with what the state allows us. There's also the option for a packaged liquor tax. The reason why we would trend towards those types of taxes is because those would apply in areas like Hubbard Woods, where you have a lot of folks from Winnetka or other towns coming, and those sales taxes would apply to folks that don't live in Glencoe. And again, as we've kind of raised that sales tax to 12% of our general fund, our goal is to expand that a little bit more so that we can lighten the load on the property tax levy. Another option, and I know that it was mentioned here as well, would be an entertainment tax. Again, as Riders Theater is bringing in folks from outside of town, that would also apply to folks that don't live here. So those would be the types of things that we would be looking at as a non-home rule unit that we just can't do today.
There's a question over here.
Michael Laporte, 10-ish years resident of Glencoe. Thank you for having us. I have two questions. The first is that of the other non-statutory home rule communities in northern Illinois, which of those have raised property taxes above the current statutory non-home rule limit? How much have they raised them above that limit and for how long? That's the first question. Second question is, do we know whether or not, from a bond issuance perspective, the golf clubhouse project could potentially be refinanced if more advantageous bond terms presented themselves while that financing process was still ongoing?
So those are for staff.
Can you answer that question?
Yep. No, I don't.
So
Just making sure.
in terms of what our other communities have done, we can't speak to all of our neighbors, but we can speak to the most recent home rule around us in Winnetka, and they have stuck to that property tax cap since they obtained home rule. But we can certainly do more research on the other neighbors. A lot of our neighbors have been home rule for quite some time, so we'll ask them to reach into their archives to find that information. The golf club, if home rule were to pass and the community would authorize that, the village would have the ability to refinance any of its outstanding debt.
just to, you know, maybe we'd be unpopular if we passed a tax cap and then came in and said, never mind. And I would note that Winnetka, Northfield, Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, that not all of them went home rule. All of them went home rule, but at least 3 of them, including Winnetka, Northfield, Lake Bluff, and Lake Forest, all of them agreed to the cap, by ordinance, and I'm not aware that any of them have rescinded that. And the idea is you wouldn't have to because you're not paying extra. The goal here is not to pay extra and therefore not need to raise taxes as much.
I'm just curious about Kenilworth. Do you know whether they affirmatively rejected home rule or they just haven't gotten around to putting it up for referendum?
I don't know the exact answer to your question. We'll research it. I know they have researched home rule, and my best recollection is they elected not to proceed. I don't think they had unanimous agreement on their village board at the time that they looked at it. It's within the last decade that they've had that conversation, but we can circle back.
There's a question here.
So we've got a perfect experiment here. Has there ever been an example of buyer's remorse? Is there a mechanism to reverse? And has it ever happened with any home rule?
Sorry. If we turn them both on, I figured out if we turn them both on at the same time. Yeah.
Yes. So the idea is that they ever had a chance to reverse that by going down this road and thinking for all the negatives. And
The simple answer to your question is yes. There is a mechanism to rescind home rule authority. It is the same mechanism that's in place to provide it, so it's a referendum. The community that I can think of that has done that is Libertyville and Rockford. Yes, Libertyville and Rockford. The circumstances around why they did that, I can't say, but I know those 2 communities did. We can maybe take 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, Mike's not so much a question, but just proposing an idea. I know everybody's concerned about the raising of the property taxes, which certainly is a concern. However, I think if you pass home rule, there's other ways to get a lot of money out of the residents. It's not just property taxes, and I applaud you for trying to put those fees onto our visitors. But the truth is, many of the residents use all our wonderful things in Glencoe as well. We all go to Writers Theater. We all utilize the restaurants heavily and frequently. I don't know if the businesses collect zip codes from whoever's checking out. Do they collect the zip codes to see where they're coming from? Who's paying into those businesses? But additionally, and you haven't mentioned that you would do this, but I'm aware Highland Park implemented a permit fee of $10,000 to anybody who wanted to tear down a property. There's other ways that you can extract lots of money from the residents in permit fees, bag fees, transfer taxes, which, thousands of dollars in transfer taxes, which as a realtor working with buyers in Glencoe, one of the things I rave about is the fact that Glencoe does not have transfer taxes. And it's one of the main reasons a lot of people buy here. They think they're gonna save money on the buy and the sell of their property, which is thousands and thousands of dollars. So all of these things could certainly be implemented if we approve home rule, and it doesn't benefit our residents. And also speaking of your bond situation, sometimes I feel like the more money you have, the more money you spend. And I understand extending paying off a bill to redo the water infrastructure over the course of 40 years is going to free up money that you'll most likely spend elsewhere and still have to raise revenues in another way. So I think you're doing a very, very good job currently of managing the funds. And I also wonder, why haven't we not been saving for this water treatment plant over the course of the last 50 years? Like, where's the money gone? Like, this is something that we should have been expecting 20 years ago when our water treatment plant was 50 years old. We should have been thinking, how are we gonna pay for this and setting money aside.
You know,
So what's going on?
let me just say, the reason we're doing home rule now is because we're looking at these enormous infrastructure obligations, particularly the water plant. The water plant was something to think about and worry about when I was first on the village board in 1985. But, you know, you can't put away for a rainy day $100 million. You just can't do it. And we didn't do it. So, and what we're interested in doing now is finding the best way to pay for this infrastructure. It is certainly true that if we can find ways to tax other folks, that other folks might include people from Glencoe, but some of those taxes will not be paid by people in Glencoe, and that is helpful to the cause. And if you go to other jurisdictions, you may be paying a sales tax that go to those jurisdictions. So, yes, it is theoretically possible that there could be other taxes. We're not thinking of them now. If we were to do some of them, I'm not sure what's required to do a real estate transfer tax. We don't have one. We're not looking at one. If I have it, I find it hard to believe that people move to Glencoe because we don't have one. But
There's many reasons, but it is a big bonus.
But if we're limited to the non-home rule tax, that's your property taxes. You know, there's no alternative. That you're just paying for stuff with your property taxes. And you know, it used to be that paying property taxes was sort of subsidized by the federal government, but that's gone. So, bottom line, from my point of view, do we want to pay extra to do the infrastructure we have to do? You know, it's not a choice. We're not going to be, we don't have the luxury of spending money on stupid stuff. We don't have the luxury to do that because we have these urgent infrastructure needs which we need to attend to.
A couple real quick things. I think one point to make is a real estate transfer tax is not an automatic possibility. If a home rule referendum were to pass, a second referendum is required to enact a transfer tax. So there is kind of a stop there from that standpoint that requires another vote. Your point is accurate. There are ways that communities have utilized their authority to enact certain programmatic things that carry a price tag. So Highland Park, they have a $10,000 demolition tax. They created that 20 years ago to create an affordable housing fund. That those dollars are then reinvested into that community for affordable housing. I'm not saying that's good or bad. Just there are reasons that a community may enact, and you're not wrong. That is, if you will, a risk of home rule. But I think part of what we've been trying to talk a little bit about tonight is that those don't happen in a vacuum. They don't happen in a place that's far, far away. They happen in this room. And so the opportunity to impact what happens is a lot easier when it's your neighbors down the street who are talking about it. But you're not wrong. We can certainly acknowledge that those are things that communities have utilized their home rule authority for. I think we're going to try to wrap it up because we're running a little long, but maybe we can take one more question.
There was a question there.
Yes, thank you. I can speak loud. My name is Tony Araki. I'm a father, realtor, developer, and Glencoe homeowner. With the ability to levy additional taxes, how can we be sure that additional taxes levied on us won't be greater than the money saved for us in longer-term bonds?
Can you repeat that? With the ability to levy additional taxes,
the money that, additional money that you levy against us in the taxes could be greater than the amount of money saved in longer term bonds. How can we be sure that we're not gonna be paying more taxes, and you're saying that you're gonna save us money with the longer term bonds? How do we know one's not gonna be greater in somebody else's favor?
You know, I guess the main thing I'll say is we all pay taxes here. It's our least favorite part of the job is levying those taxes to pay for the things that we do. But we're not doing it willy-nilly, and I guess the one thing I'll say is Glencoe, as your local government, is really, really receptive to what our citizens want us to do or don't want us to do. And let me give you, just so you know how this works, let me give you an example. On at least 2 different occasions, restaurants have proposed, with the support of some in the community, that they wanted to sell coffee and donuts at the train station. I think that's benign, okay? I do. I think that would be lovely for our commuters. We got a room full of people and said they objected to coffee and donuts in the train station, and we said, okay, we won't do it. The idea that we're going to try to raise taxes on our residents to pay for some frolic, it's unrealistic. The stuff we pay for is the stuff that our residents want and mostly need. So that's really the answer. I mean, to me, the real question is, are we gonna be able to do what we need to do? If we're not home rule, unless the federal government decides to bail us out, it's not unlikely that we will have to buy water from somebody else. And if that might sound okay, but I'll tell you that the people that buy water from somebody else don't like it, because whenever that somebody needs extra money, they can get it from the people that pay for their water. So to me, this is an urgent requirement so we can provide what the people in Glencoe expect and are entitled to. I hope that, you know, I can't give you any guarantees except it's us. And, you know, we're not gonna go crazy, and if we did, you could throw us out fast.
You know, he asked you about the money, though, you never did address, like, if you borrowed $20 million today for 20 years, if you do this home rule thing, then you can borrow for 40 years, okay? But you will pay, I just did an interest rate calculator, anybody can do it. You'll pay about, let's say, you borrow 20 million, you'll pay back 30 million at the end of 20 years, but you'll pay 60, it's a double. You pay twice as much money back over 40 years. So the cost to Glencoe is approximately double in terms of total dollars, just by, you know, it's like my kids like to put things on credit cards, sorry for the analogy, but like putting off paying money, it's not, it doesn't work. It works in the very short run.
So
right?
I guess, you know, I guess with
But
respect.
it is double, just so you know, it's not like a little bit more, it's
With
100%
respect,
more.
I understand, and so the question is, do you wanna pay for a 40-year asset in 20 years? And yes, we will pay less interest, but who's we?
Right,
I mean,
but
the
it's
answer is,
half. It is half.
but
Yeah.
if you're here for 20 years, if you're here for 20 years, you pay for all of it, and that's more. So it is, we could, you know, if we were somehow really, really rich and we could pay in cash, that's a theory, we would pay no interest. But it is unfair and a bad idea for the current residents to pay in cash for an asset that will be lasting 40, 50, 60 years.
You need a sinking fund. Didn't the village at one point try to look to some of our neighbors to joint venture a water project, but the other town, it got to a point, it couldn't happen. we looked at a way to share costs, but it didn't happen.
We have, you know, we have more recently looked to see what if we joined up with Winnetka. And we had a study done, because that's, you know, economy of scale, and they have a water plant like we do, and their water plant is old. And we looked into it. And, you know, I don't have it in front of me, but I think the cost of that project was something close to $150 million. And each of us looked at that and thought we did not have the spare change to do that. And by the way, just on water, we are desperately looking for water alternatives. We are looking to other communities to partner with. It's public that we have been talking to water agencies in DuPage County and in Western Cook County who are thinking about some, you know, enormous, we're talking to them. Is any of that gonna work? I don't know. We're trying. If it does, we're not gonna raise taxes to pay for something we don't need to pay taxes for. But we can't count on it. And what we can count on is that we all like the water, we like drinking it, we like bathing in it, we wanna make sure we can provide it to our residents. That's you and me, all of us.
So we're gonna try to wrap up. Thank you for being here. A couple of points to make. We've been furiously jotting notes as the questions have been asked. Our goal is to try to get some answers to those questions up on the village's website, where we're aggregating those questions that we've already received and others that we will get. This is being recorded. I should have mentioned that at the beginning, so that we can post it to the website. You can refer back to it. We do have more of these discussions scheduled, and we will make sure that we're getting information out to the community in enough time so folks can get those into their calendars. But I would just make mention of the fact that we appreciate you taking time this evening to come out and to share your thoughts and your questions. They are all helpful and useful as we work through this, and encourage that if you have other questions, to please reach out, either directly to my office or to Nikki. We're happy to try to point you in the right direction if we have an answer to it already, or to get that answer as best as we can. And that's something that we will also share with the village board when they have their discussion on the 15th of August. So again, thank you all for being here tonight. Be well.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.